Hey, how's it going? I'm here on the shores of the Connecticut River in Western Massachusetts, some of my home water. And I'm using this setting as a place to reflect on a question that came up from a friend of mine, a very good friend, about the idea of shifting stocks and how fish populations might be moving around related to environmental change and how that might be connected to or disconnecting them from their spawning grounds. This is particularly important for those species that basically have very high what's called site fidelity, so connections to their natal spawning grounds, places where they've adapted to go to for generations and generations and generations to go to these specific spawning areas to do something which is called maximizing fitness. Now, we think about fitness as, going to the gym and getting really buff. But from a fish's perspective and from a biological perspective, what fitness is essentially the ability to contribute genes to the next generation, to basically provide and help keeping the population going with your progeny, with your young. And so the when we think about fish that maybe migrate to natal spawning grounds, they've evolved to do that over generations to places that maximize fitness for themselves, which means it maximizes the opportunity for their offspring to be born, to be healthy, to then swim and join the population, the next generation of fish. And so when we think about these fish that go to these natal spawning grounds to maximize their fitness, they go to these places over generations based on things like chemical cues. There's lots of evidence that certain fish species use chemical cues to find those natal spawning grounds, or some parts about their geography and the hydrology, even some evidence that there might be some social signaling among different individuals where younger fish in the population learn from older fish that have been going to these natal spawning areas maybe for generations, for those species that do repeat spawning. And so when we think about how the environment might be changing and how we might be impacting the environment, these native spawning areas, or the routes to these native spawning areas, it can be quite detrimental to the future of the populations of fish. We can think about it in the context of Pacific salmon. We can think about it in the context of Atlantic salmon that used to be here in the Connecticut River until there was a series of dams that was put up, and the return rates were lower and lower, even though there were fish ladders that were hopefully going to allow adults to make it back up to their natal spawning grounds. That was not successful. They tried stocking, spent millions of dollars trying to rehabilitate the Atlantic salmon population, and at the end of the day, that was not successful. There are limited returns, and really the Atlantic salmon populations in the Connecticut are really, we might have a few fish return each year, but that's about it. So not a really good success story, and an indication or an example about how if we put barriers in place to prevent fish from getting or prevent fish from getting to their natal spawning grounds, that's going to have a cascading effect on the future of the population. We see that on the Snake River for some species there. And so there's lots of examples of how this is detrimental to fish populations. Those fish that we love, that we like to fish for, and that also have a really important place in the ecosystem. The question that came to me from a good friend was about striped bass. That striped bass along the east coast of the United States, they have a number of stocks that basically reproduce, some in the Chesapeake, some in the Hudson, and then after they spawn, they migrate up the coast, they follow Bunker and Menhaden, they fatten up, they do their thing in the summer, and then they go back to their natal spawning grounds. And the question was, if there's going to be change, like shifts in the population, maybe the population structure, or because of climate change, are they migrating further north? Are they just going to go to a different estuary to spawn? And we have to remember that the reason why they're going to these natal spawning grounds to begin with is because of an evolutionary process that has taken generations and generations and generations. And it's unfortunate that our environmental change that's happening is happening faster than the fish can evolve. So it's really highly unlikely that if there's going to be lots of environmental change, that fish from one estuary, from one stock within the striped bass population is going to be essentially moving some other place to spawn. There's examples with going back to Atlantic salmon. There's examples for when we fish out spawning aggregations. So I've done a lot of work on bonefish spawning aggregations, and if you go to the Fish Forward channel, there's some videos there about bonefish spawning aggregations. If those aggregations get fished out, it's not like they come back, because the adults that have gone there for generations and generations and generations, that's kind of imprinted in them, in their genetics, in their heritability, what they've inherited from your parents. From their parents, not from your parents, but from their parents. So we have to keep that in mind about how precious these natal spawning grounds are for fish. Whether it's, again, Pacific salmon, Atlantic salmon, striped bass, bonefish, those species that make these massive migrations to these very, very specific areas, because those areas offer a lot of benefits to the future of their young. Right, going back to the point that it maximizes their fitness, so that they can contribute more to the population and the evolution of the population moving forward, the success of the population. So think about that. We have to be very careful when we're philosophizing or thinking about how quickly fish populations might adapt in in the face of climate change, or as we fish out large individuals from a fish stock that might have been going to these natal spawning grounds for years, and because of the generational overlap from years and years and years. Anyway, I think you get the picture. Let's be careful with the idea of impacting natal spawning grounds. Let's put it in a bigger context in terms of how we are advocates and activists for the fish that we love and the habitats that they need, including those natal spawning grounds. Anyway, that's it for this time on Fish Forward. Yeah, we'll do some more as questions come up. See ya.